This is Marion Hall, testing for WGU1. This is Marion Hall, testing for 1 WGU1.
Not Dipper Printing Company, Dipper Incorporated. I'm chairman of the
This is Marion Hall reporting for WGUN. 40 years ago this Thursday morning, Eastern Airlines became Atlanta's first passenger airline when it introduced daily round-trip service to New York. Eastern, then known as Eastern Air Transport, used 18-passenger Curtiss Condors that cruised at 120 miles an hour. The 800-mile flight took 8.5 hours, cost $57.21, and made 9 stops: Greenville, Spartanburg, Charlotte, Greensboro, Richmond, Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Camden, Newark, and New York. Today, Eastern's 600-mile-an-hour, 727 Whisper jets fly non-stop from here to New York in 2 hours. The cost is $58 daytime coach, including all taxes, and $44 on Eastern's new after-dinner service. On hand for the 40th birthday party here at the Marriott Motor Hotel is Mr. Alex Dippler, an Atlanta businessman who began flying with Eastern in 1931. Mr. Dippler, can you remember your first flight over Eastern?
Very well. It was in a Conda, and we took off from Atlanta and made many stops, the first being Spartanburg, Greenville, Charlotte, Greensboro, Richmond, Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Newark. When you checked in at the ticket counter, they asked you, did you want lunch? And the plane stopped in Richmond long enough to change crews, because that was the extent that the pilots could fly. And then you ate your lunch, and a new crew boarded the plane and took you to New York.
Tell me, do you remember how many passengers were on that first flight, Mr. Dittler?
You had no trouble finding your seat, and you could practically choose any seat that you wanted.
And the stewardesses, you had some amusing anecdotes to talk about. For instance, one stewardess had a problem with one of the passengers.
The stewardess there was a drunk aboard, and the stewardess sat him in his seat, and in those days, the escape door was on the wing, and the rule was that it couldn't be locked. This drunk opened the door, put his feet out on the wing, and the stewardess came and said to him, "We don't allow that." He repeated this 3 times. Each time, she would correct him, and the final time, she said, came and sat next to him. And she said, "If you do that once more, I'll break this thermos bottle over your head." But that was not the language she used. It was a little stronger.
Do you remember what the stewardesses looked like in those days? They were a far cry from what they are today, were they not?
They wore long, I would say, we would say today that they were maxes. And they weren't. This particular stewardess that I was talking about, Eastern employed her while she was a waitress at Child's, so you can imagine the type person.
I understand you've been a pretty faithful traveler with Eastern ever since, have you not, sir?
I've flown with them ever since 1931. And in fact, I'm supposed to be their oldest passenger.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dippler. We enjoyed talking with you. Also here celebrating the 40th birthday party at the Marriott Motel is Mrs. Doug Davis, the widow of the pilot who made the first flight from Atlanta. Mrs. Davis, can you remember anything that possibly your husband may have told you about this first flight?
It was a very exciting day for him and for all of the people at the airport.
Did he have any remarks to make or tell you who was on board that first flight?
I remember reference to people from Washington and the governors of the state between Washington and Atlanta and the mayors of the various cities.
Unusually that your husband passed away. It was 3 years after this first flight. Is that not correct? It was because he was a pilot on the particular flight, was it not? What was that all about?
Doug's love for flying included the air races, and he was killed at the International Air Races in 1934.
I wonder what he would have had to say today if he was here today. He was celebrating this 40th birthday party with us. I imagine his eyes would be quite amazed at the progress that has been made in aviation.
His interest would have been tremendous in aviation, as always.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Davis. And what would be a plane without service? We have here a Mr. Charles Scraggs, who used to do the plane overhauling for Eastern when they first started their first flights. Mr. Scraggs, you must have something interesting to tell us.
Yes, we overhauled the big Condors, which made the first flights out of Atlanta, which were covered with fabric and made of steel tubing with Dural ribs. It was quite an airplane at that time.
How many maintenance men did you use on that overhauling?
I guess we must have had about 20, possibly.
At that time, what kind of an airport did we have here in Atlanta?
Well, the airport in Atlanta at that time, we did not have any set runways. It was just a field, and you landed into the wind. There was no pay runways at that time.
Did you have a hangar to put in the plane?
Oh, yes, we had a hangar which was on the east side of the field. It's now used by Southern Airways. This was our hangar and overhaul at the time of the first passenger run.
Can you recall anything of interest to our listeners that may have happened during your first years with Eastern?
Well, it was quite exciting in many ways because when I first started, we were operating only the mail wings, which was at that time Pitcairn Aviation, and later on was Eastern Air Transport. That's when we began passenger runs, flying passengers and mail. And we converted mail wings from PA-5s to PA-6s. It was quite interesting all along.
You're still working in maintenance, or what would your association be with Eastern now?
I am still in maintenance, but I am special assigned what we call field technical servicing and all troubleshooting and working out problems of this nature.
I imagine it was of great interest to you to see the film we have seen here today at the Marriott on the old plane.
Yes, it was.
Well, we want to thank you very much for your remarks, Mr. Scraggs. Mr. Bishop Simpson has also been with Eastern about 38 years and worked on some of the first planes and have some rather amusing tales to tell about these flights. Would you mind talking and telling us a few words about this?
Well, we modified one of the early Condors, and we had the first steam-heated aircraft anywhere in the world. We also made the first sleeper out of one of these B-20 Condors. And, of course, this aircraft had liquid-cooled engines, Curtiss Condor engines of 600 horsepower each, and they were liquid-cooled. And like many of the liquid-cooled engines, they were subject to leaks. And it got to be just general conversation among mechanics. Yonder comes old Leaky. Get your raincoat and a bottle of shellac and the red lead, and we got to fix it. There have been a lot of amusing things like that just among us mechanics, but
Are you still working with Eastern now?
yes, ma'am.
In what capacity, sir?
I'm production superintendent.
Well, Mr. Simpson, we want to thank you for giving your remarks about the early days of Eastern and the flights that started out from scratch like that, and it has gone a long way from the simpler days when planes just flew slower and most trips took about 4 times as long as they do today. And also I understand that the standard line for the 18 passengers on a Curtiss Condor was usually gum, cotton, or coke. This has been Marion Hall reporting for WGUN Radio as Eastern marks its 40th year as Atlanta's first airline. Of Eastern Airlines' first flight from Atlanta.